Alright, so next let's work on the eyes. We're only going to have to create one eye, and then we'll just mirror that over. So I'm just going to hide the right eye right now, and I'm just going to hide the head. I'm going to bring up preview by hitting F8 on the keyboard, and let's have a look at the textures for this eye. So we have two geometry pieces in this geometry layer. So it's the outer eye, which I have selected now. Just going to hide that, and then we have the inner geometry. Okay, so we know we've modeled that, and we know what it looks like. And let's take a look at how the textures are applied. So I'm going to unhide that geometry of the outer eye, and let's have a look at that first. So in the shader tree, go to the outer eye material assignment, and you can see that there's no diffuse amount. We have a roughness set pretty low of 5% and a reflection of 5%. 100% Fresnel. We have blurry reflections, and we also have the reflection rays pumped up from the default 64 up to 256. In material transitive properties, we have this, it's 100% transparent, and we have a little bit of refractive index. Refractive index is how something is, if you're looking at glass or water or something, how something distorts beyond it. It's a really cool effect, and I usually set this pretty low. I pay less attention to what the numbers say, and I pay more attention to what it actually looks like. So in other words, the refractive index for, say, an eye might be 1.27 or whatever. I have no idea, but that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is what it looks like in the preview, in the render. Okay, so I want to encourage you to pay less attention to over here and more attention to what it looks like in the viewport. I think it's going to carry you a lot further working that way. That's the outer part of the eye. Let's take a look at the inner part of the eye, which is probably the most important part. We can see that obviously we've got this texture applied to it. I'm just going to bring that map up, and with that texture selected, you'll see it populate in our UV viewport right here. You can see that whenever we created the UVs, we were sensitive to the area of the iris. Okay, so this information all around here, wherever we see the iris, is much more important than the outer part. I didn't want a line, an actual visible line right there. I wanted to create this sort of soft edge. Anyway, what I did was to sort of isolate where I want to place the graphic, just to figure out, how many rows out and how many rows in or whatever. So where does that line of that edge of the iris on the artwork, where does that fall? All right, so this is what I want to, because you can see that, let me just hide this. Just going to hit H to hide that. You can see that this is, in terms of the geometry, that's a good vantage point. This is where it curves over. Okay, so I wanted it to sort of bleed out a little bit and to fade off, so it's a nice, soft, more realistic look. There are a number of different ways to do eyes, and this is just one that I particularly like, and I like that soft edge. So let's just have a look at this graphic and how it's applied in Photoshop, how we actually assembled it. One thing I want to note just real quickly is that because this is this image is applied in diffuse color, we want to make sure that it's gamma corrected. So we know how to do that. It comes in as a gamma of 1, and you divide that by 2.2, and you get this 0.4546. Okay, so now that image is correct in linear color space, we're good to go. Let's hop over to Photoshop, and I'm just going to show you how this eye is constructed. Whenever I start an eye, a model that I'm using eyes, I'll usually use some version of this artwork. This is more or less a circular, like perfect circle iris, which is fine. It's got a transparent background in case I want to change the iris color, that sort of thing. Just turn this off. You can see that our UVs are not quite circular. Okay, they're a little squished. Well, how do you apply a circular graphic and make it fit within this kind of squashed UV? It's simple. You just sort of squash the graphic. And in this case, we're not really squashing it that much, so it's not going to be distorted at all. Now, this is the section that I highlighted when we were over in the 3D view, that this is the fall off. This goes in, this is like the valley, and this is like the peak right here. So this is I kind of targeted where I wanted that soft edge to be, and then I just sort of resized the graphic accordingly. So it falls right along that ridge. So I'm pretty happy with that. Take a look at the 3D view. Again, I want to show you this highlight and this shadow here and how we achieve that. Well, in this render, in the preview, we're not getting that with only the lighting choices that we have. We have lights in the scene already, but what we're doing is we're sort of cheating that texture. We're sort of cheating that light a little bit through our texture. And let me just show you how that's done. So this is, let me just turn that off real quick. This is our, you can see it's the same value across it. So this is a pretty flat graphic. Well, I don't want that. I want to have, really rich, deep eyes. So what I'll do is I'll add a multiply layer on top of that. And then, so I get this nice shadow at the top where the eyelid might cast a shadow. I'm sort of cheating that a little bit. And then underneath, on the bottom down here, we'll just toggle that on and off. I'll add a little highlight layer. Okay, now this particular layer is set to overlay. In that blend mode, whenever you create an overlay blend mode layer in Photoshop and you paint white with it, it'll pump up in terms of saturation of color and value of whatever it's painted on top of. With that combination, we get this nice bit of depth. Okay, and that's kind of a cheat, kind of a free thing, so we don't have to work so hard in Modo to get that perfect lighting situation. Again, we're working with a layered Photoshop file. We're going to export what we need, what we don't need. We're just going to hide. One last thing about this particular graphic is that if you'll notice the outside here, I'm just going to bring back our wires. So this is the edge of the UV, okay, and you can see that it's a lot thinner, a lot smaller than the artwork or the UVs on the iris here. Okay, I want more pixels. I want these UVs to be larger with the iris and thereby hold more pixels or resolution than this outside. Okay, I could have even made these smaller. I could have made these a little bit bigger, but honestly, in the render, it's going to be pretty small. And this is a 2K texture, so this is more than enough for my needs. The color of the white part of the eye is not really white. You can see that it's a little cooler gray. So I have a tendency to sort of overlight a little bit, so my scenes are a little bit brighter. And I know that if that's going to be white, it's just going to be completely blown out. All right, so I'll just choose a little bit cooler gray in this case rather than just white. All right, so I'll hide that, save that off as a JPEG, bring that back into Modo, and then we're good to go. We've got our graphic that's, we've cheated that texture, so we have this even without the eyelids. We've got this shadow at the top, this highlight at the bottom to simulate that sort of natural, elevated light, which I think works pretty well in this case. All right, so that wraps up the eye. We're ready to move on. All right, so we're making our way around the model. Let's talk a little bit about the face. Now, there are a few different things that are going on here in the shader tree. Let's take a few minutes to talk about them. First of all, we're going to be using a different material than what we've used before, and this is Modo's skin material. It looks something like this, and you can find it up here. So we'll go to Add Layer, and under Custom Materials to Skin Material. We'll just drop that in there for now. Another thing we're going to talk about is this makeup layer. Okay, so this was created in Photoshop, and using techniques that we've learned before, we've applied it to the face UV, and it populated here. We also have a shine layer. Okay, so this might be in another lighting situation where you're using physical lights. It might be a specular layer, but we're not using any physical lights in this scene. We're only using illuminated polygons, if you remember. And with illuminated polygons, you don't get any specularity. We'll talk about how we're tricking the render to get this sort of specular look, these sort of highlights or shine to the lips. The reason I wanted to do that is that I wanted to make a kind of a visual difference between her shiny lips and her soft skin. So we've also created an instance of this shine layer to create a bump map. And we have a different effect assigned to it over here in the right-hand column. And you can see it's assigned to bump. That just sort of helps to accentuate some of the oiliness or the shine to her lips. Let's talk about this skin material. I'm going to turn off some of these other layers just so that we can see what we started with. And then as this sort of populates, we'll talk about the some of these different parameters. Now we don't have time to go in to take a deep dive into the actual skin material, but I do want to point out a few things to you, a few things for you to sort of experiment with and just sort of understand the logic that's happening here. This special material is using a combination of things to get this sort of buttery look. Now this particular default is not working, but I did wanted to show you where you start from and then how you might adjust it. Alright, so we'll contrast this default skin material with some of the settings that I did to create this warmer look. Let's just take a look at some of the defaults. Think of this sort of as a cross section of how skin might look. So on the outer surface you'd have an oil layer, and then going in you'd have an epidermis, then an upper dermal scattering, and then a lower dermal scattering. We also have some advanced properties over here which we won't touch. Our needs are much simpler than that. So I just wanted to direct your attention to this area right here. So if you think of this again sort of as a cross section, that helps sort of set the logic of how you might construct this. If you can look here, we have a diffuse amount set on the epidermis layer, and this skin material really relies heavily on subsurface scattering. So we know that we have subsurface scattering going on here, and you can see that some of the properties, they're different subsurface amounts, different subsurface colors, and scattering distances. There's also a little bit of front weighting adjustments per layer. So all these sort of combinations they're working in conjunction to give us a nice sort of starting point for getting this buttery sort of skin texture that we can build from. Let's contrast that a little bit with some of the settings that I did. So you can see, and I'm just going to toggle these back on. Alright, so this is the custom material, a couple of different settings. First of all, I turned on blurry reflections. The diffuse color, you can see the diffuse amount, it was a little too yellow, so I turned the diffuse amount down to something really low, like a 5%, and then to get some more color, some more warmth, I just cranked up the subsurface color to something that's a little bit warmer from this color, which has a lot more yellow in it. And that's really all I did to sort of start this. If you wanted to change that color, just click on it just like you would any other color swatch, and then just make some sort of subtle adjustments. See what it looks like with preview. Preview is really great about that, giving you a really accurate representation of what the final render is going to look like. So really, do some experimenting. I didn't really touch the front weighting or anything like that. The scattering distances, I didn't touch any of that. So that's just sort of how I started, and then we just sort of built on top of that. One other thing I wanted to mention before getting to some of these other layers is this base material. Alright, so you want to keep that in place, and I'll show you why. The only thing that I changed with that default material is that I made it double-sided. Alright, so if you remember in the geometry that we created for the face, there are no physical eye sockets back there, so there's nothing to capture the shadow. So if without that, you can see straight through the model. See that little, what looks like a highlight? Well, it's not really a highlight. We're actually seeing through her head because the skin material is only one-sided. So turn this back on to double-sided, and that problem goes away. Now let's make our way up here to her makeup layer, and we'll have a look at that. We know how to create our UVs, how to export them, and how to import them. And this was done the same way. So if we hop over to Photoshop, just have a look at that map. You can see here let's see what this is a 2K texture. What I've got here, I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see this a little bit better. Now you can paint all of this in Modo. Modo's got a very robust painting system, but I just chose to paint this in Photoshop. I just like the control, and as an illustrator, I'm just more accustomed to working this way than in. Sometimes I'll paint in Modo, but in this case, no. So we have a few different things that are going on here, and you can see we're working with this strategy of using a master layered file, and then we save off our map. This is just a ping file, PNG file, saved off of what we want and applied into Modo. So this is under a megabyte, and this master file is like 5 megabytes. So anyway, it's just sort of an economical way of working. We also have some flexibility in terms of, what if we wanted to change the eye color, the nose, the cheeks, that sort of thing. Everything is on its own layer, so we can control those independently. You can see also that, well, I have this background, this like cream color, this flesh color in the background, and I put that in there to allow me to work on a color that is closer to our default skin tone. So let me just show you that. I'm going to turn that makeup layer off, and then when preview updates, we're going to just do a screen grab of this, and then I'll show you the kind of the workflow. So this is I started off with this basic material. We sort of worked out, we sort of warmed her skin up a little bit. I found an area, something like that, and just do a little screen grab of that area right there. Let's just see if we can grab it. We'll bring that up in Photoshop. So we'll select it and copy it, come over here, and then we can paste it. Make sure that it's on a layer that we can see. Then I just sort of sampled that and then filled this background layer. So I'm not painting on white. Okay, this gives me a better representation of what that color is going to be. So as I apply my paint, I'm not applying it over white, which is, there'd be a lot more back and forth doing it like that. All right, so that's some of the strategy. Now, I've overcompensated for her makeup, and if we look in I'm just going to turn this back on, and you can see as this starts to populate how much softer it is. I'm just going to select it. See, it's not really purple, it's pinkish. So, and that's fine. That's close to what I want. You can see that it's heavily saturated in Photoshop here. And I painted a layer, and then I duplicated it and just painted a little bit more purple on there. So you can see what's happening with that. And I know that I'm going to lose some of that color because this particular makeup layer is set to this epidermis subsurface. All right, so we'll talk about that in a second. I also have her cheeks painted, and you can see that that's where it started, and it's real subtle, but then I duplicated that, and it just made it a little bit more obvious, a little bit more saturated. And then I did the same thing with her nose, a little bit warmer color there. And then also with her lips. I'm just going to turn this on. So let's go over to Modo and check her lips out. Just a little bit, take a little bit closer look at that. I'm going to turn those layers on just to give us the full effect of our kind of shine layer, our specularity. And as this populates, you can see that bump happening, working really nicely. And then in conjunction with this oil layer that we have applied, or this shine layer. But I want you to see that it's real soft around the edges. Okay, and I just wanted some softness. So you can see in the geometry how that looks. All right, so you can see that softness coming through on the map that I painted. You can do that if I wanted a hard edge around there. So we've got good geometry around there. We'll just select that loop by hitting L, and then shift up arrow. We can grow that selection. So you can see that if I wanted to paint her lips just like with a hard edge, what I'll do here, I'll also do a screen grab. Better yet, let's just double click on that, go to our list view, and then we'll double click on that UV, and this will give us our UVs. And then here, I'll just do a little screen grab of that. And so now, when I bring that image back into Photoshop, I can sort of match it up. Alright, so I'll select that, select all and copy, come back over here, and then I'll paste it. Just move it to the side so I can sort of match this up, so I can sort of count the lines, or you can even overlay it if you wanted to. Alright, so now I know specifically what areas that I needed to paint within to get this sort of look, to get, to sort of adhere to where these lines fall, so that matches up when I get over here to Modo. Alright, so it's just a little workflow tip there. We don't need to have the skin material, or the skin color rather, back into Modo, because we're laying this makeup on top of the skin shader, which is going to be sort of absorbed and have this nice glow to it, a real natural look. So we turn off what we don't need. Alright, so we're going to turn that off. Obviously we won't need our wires, and then we'll just save this map out. That map looks like this, and then it's just applied. Alright, bring that in, and it populates, making sure that we have our face UV selected as we bring it in. And then also, because it is painted, we need to have our gamma correct, so we're working in a linear color space, so we know how to do that. We have our makeup layer in place. So now let's talk a little bit more about the lips and how we get this effect. Oh, almost forgot. Let's talk about how this makeup layer is applied rather. All right, so when you bring that map in, it's going to come in as diffuse color, all right, which is fine, but it's not what we want. So in the effect column, if you right click on this, you're going to come down to our custom material channels, skin material channels, and we have a whole list of areas that we can target. So this is new, and this is special because it comes with the skin material. Okay, so we can paint a map, and then we can apply that map, and then we can assign a specific effect. So you can see here that this map, this makeup layer rather, is targeting the epidermis subsurface color. Okay, and these, again, this is one of those things that you sort of have to play with just to see if you get the effect that you want. Pay less attention to the name of it and pay more attention to what it looks like in the render and in this preview. Alright, so I was pretty happy with this subsurface color effect, so we're going with that. So let's take a look at the lips. Now the lips, just going to see how ugly that looks if we turn that off, or maybe we want to keep her makeup on. But the lip, so if you click on this texture, it's going to populate here in the viewport just to show you what we're looking at. Actually, I'm going to turn that back on just to make it a little nicer. We can go to our items to our list. We can double click on our UV, and with this image selected, it can populate. It'll populate here in addition to the UV, so you can see. Now this is a low quality map. It's only like a 512 by 512. We're going to recreate this, and I'll show you how we're applying this and how we're going to use this. Because this map was painted all in Modo. All right, it's obviously a very simple map. But let's hop over to the Paint tab, and we'll show you how that's constructed. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, go to Utilities, Add a Color Texture. It's going to ask us, all right, well, what do you want to do? Let's call it Lips, and I want this to be a JPEG image. I don't need any alpha. So I want this to be a gray map, and let's just do 1K, and I want to set the color of white. Okay, so it might be set to black. Just hold the shift key and then drag to the right. Alright, so we're going to set that all to white, and the whole thing is going to turn white. You want to make sure that you have your face UV selected before you do that, to make sure that it's targeted. It's targeted. Our lips map we've just created is targeting the right UV. All right. So let's go to our paint tools, select the airbrush and a soft tip and then a nozzle. And then now we're ready to paint specularity. Not really specularity, but it's an oil. It's going to look like specular. And this can be as detailed or as general as you want. Just going to show you this just for the effect. I'm going to hit F8. I'm going to bring up preview. Now we're not really, as this population, we're not going to see anything yet in the lips because we haven't made the effect to oil. The subsurface amount on the skin material is just sucking in all of the painted data. So we don't have anything there yet. All right, so let's go ahead and change that. So we're going to change our diffuse color. Just right click on that. We'll go down here to where we were before, custom materials, skin material channels, and we're going to go to oil reflection amount. All right, something weird's going to happen. Now, in her entire face, I think that's a little too oily. What do you think? So that's no problem. What we need to do is we need to invert this map. It's easily done. Select that, make sure it's selected, and just hit invert. All right, so we're going to see is that we're going to start to get the areas that we paint in black are going to be reflected. Okay, and I think that's pretty obvious right there. All right, just for effect, I'm going to paint a little bit up here. Now I'm right clicking and I'm dragging here with my paintbrush just to give us just to resize the brush, and we're painting with black, and you can see I'm just going to make that round on her lip right there, just so we can sort of see that a little bit better. All right, that might be a little harsh, but I think you get the idea. I'm going to paint a few more of these lines, and then we'll move on to the bump. Okay, I think that's good enough for demonstration. Okay, and if we wanted to, we could put a little bit on her nose. Just a touch, just to kind of show you what's happening. Okay, now that obviously doesn't look great, but you get the effect. So this doesn't necessarily apply to her lips. It's just wherever, in this case, wherever we're painting black. Now, I want to use this as a bump, so I'm not going to put a bump right on her nose, so we won't do that. So we have this painted. Let's go ahead and make an instance of this lips, this reflective. All right, map. Okay, let's just hit escape, select it, right click, and we're going to create an instance. There we go. And we want to change this to bump, so right click on this and go to bump. And you can see that in combination with our oil map and our bump map, we're getting a nice little effect here. Now, again, how do we control that bump? We go down to our base material and we can adjust the parameters. You can see I have it set here to 250 but if that's too low, let's just go to 1 millimeter, and that's probably going to be too high. But anyway, that's how you adjust the bump, and we're using that as an instance. So anything that we paint, let's just see, where do we go? Anything that we paint on our map, it's going to be duplicated in our bump layer too. Okay, so additionally, because these are painted layers, we can control the opacity. If we found that this is too oily, or too shiny, or this is too much bump, we also have control over the opacity of these layers individually. Okay, so like, let's just turn that bump down, something maybe half the strength. Okay, so play with that a little bit and see if you like it. I think you're gonna like it. It's a real subtle thing, but it's kind of nice. We probably won't have any really tight shots on her face, but if we do, it's a nice little thing to have in there. And then finally, what you want to do is once you have all this created, you want to make sure that you save your maps. So save your document, also save your map. All right, so right here, there's a couple ways to do it. Just right click and go to save. Or you can go to save all images. So we'll just do it down here. We'll just save it, and now the painted map is saved. So that wraps up the face. So I think it's time to move on. Alright, so let's work on the hair now. So I've prepared this graphic for us, and this gives us a kind of a breakdown of the steps that we're going to be taking to get this final look. So this is our goal right here. And I think with a combination of these things that we're going to talk about, we have a nice stylized look to the hair. You know, it's not photorealistic, obviously, but it's not really cartoony. It's somewhere in between, that nice sort of stylized look that I think the rest of the character has. Before you begin the hair, I really want to encourage you to do a lot of referencing. So look to photographs, look to drawings, and just like anything, whether it's the hair or other body parts that you're wanting to recreate, the better reference you have, the better you'll understand what it is that you're working on. It just makes sense. So take a little time to do a little bit of referencing. There's a lot of different hairstyles, and it's really helpful when you go to actually create the artwork for this part of the process that you understand what it is that you're doing and you have good photo reference by which to go from. So let's take a look at this breakdown. You can see that we have as a starting point our geometry that's been colored. We've just assigned a basic material mask to the geometry. We've got these hair strips for her ponytails, and then also this hair strip in the middle, or in the front rather, and that just helps to break this up, this big shape up a little bit. Now if you remember earlier on in the tutorial, I had hair strips all over the top part, and while I like that look, I prefer this kind of a hybrid, this kind of a combination of techniques to kind of get that look that I was going for. So it's just kind of the creative process. As you get into it, you start to change your mind and the idea starts to evolve. We started with this, and this is a good blank canvas for us to start from. We have a little bit of subsurface scatter. You can tell that there is some richness. It's not just, it doesn't look real plasticky. Okay, so we're going to talk about that specific material when we get to Modo, but this is our start. The next thing we want to do is to create a displacement map. We're going to talk specifically about how that map is created and why we're creating it, but you can see what it's doing here is we've started to get a lot of hills and valleys and definition in the strands of the hair, these little groups of strips that are sculpted into the hair, and that's a really a good next step, and it's really the foundation for where we're actually going to paint the hair strands. So this is good. This is, you can see it breaks up the silhouette, nice hills and valleys, a good place to start. Then moving on, we've applied a diffuse color map on top of that. You can see that we have these individual hair strands that we've painted, and we've painted these in Photoshop, but you can also paint them right in Modo. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I prefer Photoshop over painting it in Modo in this particular case. I just have a little bit more control, and as an illustrator, I love my tools, and you sort of carve out a kind of workflow that makes sense to you. So I want to encourage you to do what's comfortable for you, but I chose Photoshop in this case, and you can see that we have some nice strands, and this is a kind of an evolution as we're moving forward, but it's starting to, you know, everything is sort of following along with on top of this displacement map to just give us further direction of where that hair, you know, further information of where those hair strands are going to go. So the next part is we've instanced this diffuse color map, and we've applied the effect, rather than a diffuse color, we've applied it as subsurface color. I'm just going to toggle that on and off so you can see the difference. Alright, so that's just with the basic color map applied as diffuse, and then we've instanced it and changed the effect from diffuse color to subsurface color. Okay, so you can see that we've got a lot more richness and depth for free by applying that diffuse color as the effect of a subsurface color. So moving forward with a little bit more definition, we've applied a bump map. And you can see really how, especially in areas like here and in the hair strands in the back and this one in the front, I'll toggle that on and off so you can see the difference. We're getting a lot more definition, and that's just a bump map based off of the artwork that we created for the diffuse map. So we'll talk about that and how we created that. And then finally, we have a stencil map. Now we've seen stencil maps used before in the eyebrows and the eyelashes, but that serves to add a little bit more realism and sort of break up the chunkiness of the hair without the map. All right, now I like that look, and you can totally go with that. It just depends on how far you want to take it. I like this a little bit better. I think it's going to match the style of the character a little bit more, and I like the little bit of, this layered sort of detail, one layer of detail on top of another layer of detail. And I think that, again, all together, these things that we've combined really serve well to match the complexity of the character. All right, so now I think we're ready to move over to Modo. We'll show you how these things are applied, and we'll create some of these maps. So let's have a look at the 3D scene. So we're in the render viewport. We have our hair group materials and our hair strips group and our materials in there. So let's take a look at the hair material itself for the base. All right, so we have a lower diffuse amount, and this is set to like a really dark red, and it's lower diffuse because we have a subsurface. We have some subsurface going on, and I want that subsurface to have more of a presence than just the diffuse. So I have the roughness set to 100% because I want the light to sort of cascade over, not be so concentrated in just one area. So we increase the roughness. There is some reflection and Fresnel, and the reflection color I changed from the default white to a really warm red-orange sort of color. Turned on blurry reflections, and the reflection rays I bumped up to 256. That's just going to give us a lot smoother results. The material transitive properties, we have a subsurface amount of about 35% and a subsurface color of this deep red color. This subsurface amount and the color you want to tweak just so that you'll get the right color that you're after. It's going to come through, and with the combination of the diffuse layers that we have, it's really there's a relationship between the diffuse layers that we've painted and the subsurface color and the amount. So you'll want to tweak that a little bit. Let's just take a look. We have a displacement texture. We have our diffuse color map that we've applied, and this is painted in Photoshop. We'll take a look at that. We've instanced that diffuse color map to create a subsurface color, and you can see that it is an instance because this is italicized. We've changed the effect from diffuse color to subsurface color by right-clicking in the effects column, going to basic channels, down to subsurface color. So it's given us that nice depth that we talked about. The darks get darker and more saturated, the lights get lighter and more saturated. So it's a really good thing to have. And then we also have the hair bump. We'll take a look at this in the Photoshop file. This is a grayscale map, but the artwork is actually, we borrowed the artwork, the pixel information from the diffuse color map. So we're not having to recreate that. Then for the diffuse, for the hair strips, which are in the ponytails and the strip right here, same sort of thing. So we have the diffuse color map that we've painted. We have applied that, we've instanced it, and then changed the effect to subsurface color. And we have a bump map, again, that's based off of the artwork that we created for the hair strips. And then lastly, we have the stencil map. We've seen this kind of map before in the eyelashes and in the eyebrows. And we know how to apply all of these textures from previous lessons. So let's take a look at how to create the first step of this hair, which is the displacement map. What we're going to do, come over to our Paint tab, and we're going to turn all of this off, and then recreate that displacement map. So to do that, you want to make sure that your hair geometry layer is selected. I'm going to create a new material in here. Come over here to Utilities, and we're going to create a displacement texture. So we'll call this Hair Demo. And an OpenEXR is just fine. I like to use a 4K map for this. You can go higher or lower, but because this is image-based sculpting, the idea is that the amount of definition in the actual map is dependent on the resolution of the image that we create. So 4K is going to give us a good amount of resolution. We want this to be a grayscale map, and we want to set the color to absolute gray, which is 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. It's going to come in as a vector displacement, but we can change that. It's not what we want. So just right click on it and come down here to surface shading and change it from vector displacement to just regular displacement. So I think we're all set. So make sure that that layer is selected, and let's come over here to our sculpting tools. For this particular model, I only use the carve tool, but we have access to all these other really great sculpting tools, so you can mix it up whatever effect you want to get. I'm also using a pressure sensitive tablet, a Wacom Cintiq tablet. You don't have to have a pressure sensitive tablet, but it's a much better experience when you're creating these kind of organic maps. So if you don't have one, look into getting one. You don't need a big one, just something that's small and will give you pressure sensitivity. That's all good. We have that tool selected. We select a soft tip and then a nozzle. And then you come down here and you have some preset shapes. So by default, this is set to sharp, but you can change that to any of these, and you can see that the profile of that tip changes with the setting. All right, so we're just going to keep it as sharp, and then you have an offset amount, and that's basically the strength of the stroke. Before we actually start painting on that, I want to direct your attention to our texture layer. So with a displacement, we want to set the low value at -100, and then the high value at 100. And that gives us a full range of displacement. So the lows are going to be low and the highs are going to be high. All right, so I think with that, we're ready to go. So I like to start in an inconspicuous area just to sort of get a feel for the tool that I'm working with. And I'm right-clicking to resize my brush. I think that back here is as good a spot as any to start. Just using some pin pressure to get that look, to get that depth. Just start. You can use the shift key, as you know, to sort of smooth things out a little bit. This is kind of a good place for me to start. Feeling pretty good about that. Now, with this stage of the process, the purpose of the displacement map in this case is to not create every single strand of hair, but rather groups of hair. I'm going to resize my brush a little bit bigger, and I'm going to carve down into that. All right, now that's a little bit too much. I'm just going to undo that. I'm going to lower my offset amount to say something like that. Going to redo that line. All right, that's still a little bit much. Come down a little bit lower, something like that, and let's try it again. That's much nicer. All right, so you can see as the light hits it, we're really getting a nice carve into there. All right, so using your photo reference, what you want to do is just sort of use that as a guide to create some of these bigger areas. Something like this. Now you can hold the control key down, and instead of making a valley, you can make a hill. All right, so what I like to do, sort of do something like that. And I still think that that offset amount is a little strong, so I'm going to bring it down a little bit lower. All right, I'm also using some pin pressure, so it's pretty sensitive. It's a very responsive tool. All right, so that's much nicer. All right, so what I'll do is I'll create a little valley, and then to sort of celebrate that depression, I'll create a little hill right beside it. I'm just going to work my way around the whole model to do that. Then the end down there, I might hit the shift key to smooth it out a little bit. Smooth that out a little bit. Maybe that continues up here. Something like that. All right. You want to work your way around all the way, creating these bigger shapes first. All right. So we want to be sensitive to how the silhouette looks and how we break this up a little bit. So that's looking pretty good. Add a little bit more in here. You can see how real quickly we can start to get closer to where we want to be. And I'll do that on this side too. Because we have a lot of area to go from all the way here to all the way over here, just sort of break that up. You know, you don't have to have one particular strand of hair that goes all the way across there. So get a good vantage point to start from and sort of make your way around. Alright, I think you get the idea. I'll put a couple more in and you can sort of see it starting to happen. Alright, when it comes here to the valley, here this big crease right there, what I like to do sometimes, I'm just going to turn on my wireframe, is I like to hide the geometry, or you can lock the geometry if you want. So I'm just going to middle mouse click all that. Make sure I get all that there. I'm just going to hit the J key to lock it. Come back to my carve tool. I'm going to turn off my wireframe again, and I'm going to sculpt right into that crevice there. Alright, because why I locked that is so that if I have a stroke that comes across here, it's not going to affect the geometry because it's locked. Okay, it gives you a really clean line right there. Increase that offset amount a little bit more. It'll be a little bit more obvious in the video. So you come across here, and you don't have to worry about stopping your stroke. Okay, it's just going to stop for you because that geometry is locked. And again, you can sort of hit that with the control key to create a hill there. Come back over a valley. Really just sort of take your time, have a little fun with it. Now, again, this is all off of the deformation here. Not the deformation, the displacement. It's all based off of an image. So if we toggle that image on and off, you can see what's happening. So it's all based on the resolution of that image. All right, it's a really flexible way to work. Sort of smooth that out. Again, think big shapes. You want to hit I to unlock your geometry. Make sure it's all unlocked, and it is. Okay, and you can just continue on. Mask this part off to work on that. Alright, so the last thing I want to show you about this displacement map is say like you've got an area, say like back here that you're not happy with, or say that you wanted to erase on the displacement map. Okay, well how do you do that? It's real simple. Just get a paintbrush. Because this is an image, we can paint with gray, absolute gray, to erase. Alright, so you want to make sure that your foreground color is set to absolute gray, which is 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, and then you'll just right click to resize your brush, find an area that you want to paint out, and then just go to town. And you can see what a nice job it does just to paint out areas that you don't want. So with all that, the combination of those techniques, go ahead and take some time to sculpt that displacement map, because that's going to set us up nicely for the next part, which is painting the diffuse map of all the color strands. Alright, so with a little bit more work, we've got the displacement map finished, and you can see that we've got the start of some nice hills and valleys all over the model. Okay, that's still not quite as deep as I'd like it to be. So another way to control that is come down here to where the surface normal is and change this displacement distance from 1 centimeter up to say like 4 centimeters. So now instantly we can see that we've got a lot of deeper valleys, and our peaks or our hills are a lot taller, and so that's really what I'm wanting. So you might want to do that before you start sculpting. Sometimes you can, just go back and forth. You sculpt a little bit, change the displacement distance, and so it's a little bit of an organic sort of workflow. But that's also how you can sort of adjust the height difference of our displacement map. So with that painted, we're ready to move into creating the diffuse map of the individual strands. So this sculpted information is a good start for us, and so now we know generally where we need to paint our strands. But in order to do that on a flat map, we're going to need a guide. So if we look at the diffuse texture, just turn everything on, you can see that with the UVs on, we're painted and it looks like it's a clear direction, but how do we know where that information is going to be painted? You can see there's a certain intentional direction to all of this. Well, we do that through a guide. So let's create that guide first. All right, so we're going to leave this displacement map on. We're going to go to Utilities, and we're going to create a color texture. So add color texture, and we'll just call this hair guide and call this start. And this can be a JPEG image. Now the resolution needs to be the same resolution as the map that we want to use it on, which is a 4K map. So we'll select 4K, and then we'll change our format from RGBA. We just need a grayscale map. We want to set the color as white. All right, so if this is not set to white, just hold the Shift key down and drag to the right. All right, so now we have that color texture in place. Again, we want to make sure that that texture is targeting the proper UV map, so just confirm that. So it's hair main, and that's correct. With that map selected, let's come over to our paint tools, and we're going to create a drawing right on top of our sculpted material. So select the paintbrush and a hard brush tip, that's just fine. We don't need a nozzle in this case. This map is not going to be a really pretty map, but it's totally going to be useful for us. So with all that selected, we want to start drawing out lines to help us to define where these edges of our hair pieces are going to be. All right, that might be a little bit thick, so you can right click to sort of resize your brush a little bit. That's a little bit better. And what I'm going to do is try and hit these landmarks, these big landmarks. And you can see how I'm sort of following the sculpted hair all the way through. All right, so this is going to come down, something like that. You see, I'm just going to carry it all the way down there to the point. Make sure that you get underneath here, because that's also sculpted. Wherever you've sculpted, yours is going to look a little different than mine. So you'll just want to make sure that you give yourself enough information. This will be a lot more obvious when we bring it over into Photoshop. But I'm just going to take my time and go all the way around here. And I'm even going to just maybe, you can change the color if you want, or just put a little dotted line, whatever you prefer. I like to kind of do that just to differentiate. That's a border, or that's like a crease. So all the way to like all the way around where that crease might be. And I just continue that down. And I'm going to continue it on over on this side. And what I also like to do is to give myself some arrows. So this map is just for me to, again, to use as a guide, but I want these arrows, they're going to indicate which direction the hair is moving. All right, so when I go to paint that information, I'll have a good idea, just a more informed idea of where these marks need to be. I'm going to pause the video and do a little bit more work on this, and then we'll come back and take a look at the more completed model. Now, so with a little bit more work, we've finished the guides, so you can see that I'm really sort of getting in here and not including every single stroke, every single sculpted stroke, but just the areas, the big areas that I really want to have defined. And this is, I have some arrows in here so I know that where the direction of the hair is going to go. So when we look at this on a flat map, we'll have a good clear direction. So just like with any image, you want to make sure that you come down here, right click on it and save it. So now let's hop over to Photoshop and bring this map in. That's our map. We'll just open that up. Now this is a 4K map. What that allows us to do is to copy it, bring it over to our diffuse color map, and then paste it, and this is going to be a perfect fit. And you'll see, I just change this to multiply, you can see that it matches up perfectly. And that's the advantage of working at the same resolution for all of your maps. So now you can see which direction these hair strands need to go or need to flow. Let's take a look at, I'm just going to hide that, and we're going to take a look at the construction of the hair material itself. Might as well go ahead and turn off the guides too. You can see that we've got several different layers going on here, and I'm just going to break this down for us. Again, all based off of the direction of the guide that we created. We're going to create a flow of all this painted information. We're going to create colored strokes. So you can see that I've sort of built up a base layer to start with. Then I added this layer next. Okay, and this is kind of my main hair layer. Now there are some, you can create a Photoshop brush that allows you to create more than one hair strand per stroke, and that works pretty well. Sometimes I feel it looks like a little mechanical looking, so sometimes I'll use individual strokes. It's a little bit more work, but it's a lot more organic. So I'll just leave that up to you how you create it. So I'll take that layer, and then I'll duplicate it to create a blurred layer, and I'll just lower, I'll put that underneath and just blur it so those function together. There's a little bit of a glow and a little bit more color. And then finally, I added a little bit of painted highlight into that map. So we have this end result. So then, working with this master Photoshop file idea, we save off what we need as a JPEG image or whatever whatever we need it for. In this case, this is going to be a JPEG image. We save that off, and then we're ready to import it. Since we've painted all of this color information already for these strands, what we've done is borrowed that information to create our bump map. So our bump map is just a grayscale map. You can see that there's no more, these are the exact same lines. I've just isolated the pixels and then just filled it with black and then blurred it. So again, saving off a JPEG image, bringing that back into Modo, and we have a bump map without any extra work, really. So let's hop back over to Modo and then see what that's all going to look like. So we'll turn off our guide, we'll turn off our displacement. You can see that the bump map is applied. So that bump map is dependent on this material that's under it. That's set to 2 millimeters. Let's just check to see. Yeah, see, that's a little bit strong. So if we change that back to 1 millimeter, let's say, we're going to lose a little bit of strength, and that's a much more natural look. So that's just a bump map, And then once we add our displacement map, we add our diffuse color map on top. Then we instance that to our subsurface color. So if you see this happen here, just toggle that on and off, that displacement map, and the OpenGL will update for you. So all those things combined, I think, make for a really nice combination of stylized hair. I'm really pretty pleased with that. The only difference between, say, like that map and what we did in terms of process with the ponytails is just we've added this stencil map which we created. And so again, we don't need a guide for the stencil map. It's more or less just basically following the geometry, because it's really simple geometry and you can see how that's constructed. And then, you know, if you look at our UV map for our hair strips, you can see that's what the UV map looks like. And so it's fairly easy to follow that along to create our stencil map. So I think with that, I believe we're ready to move on.